Hello and welcome to the first in a series of tutorials from the GEMP admin crew. This is Alex aka Skins, and today I'm going to be taking you through some pads. So I'll start off by just talking you through a basic pad that I like to use and explaining at each point why I'm doing what I'm doing. Just getting my favorite go-to synth operator, loading up a white noise oscillator, and then just having it a bit turn it down so it's not going to be too unpleasant to listen to. That's the sound you get out of it, which obviously is no good as a pad. Nobody wants to listen to that. So a trick that I'll quite often use is to stick a resonator on it, and this, through some kind of additive EQing that I don't really understand, creates like a nice harmonic melodic content, so you get a note rather than just a psh. So I'm gonna pick some intervals here and build a chord. That's just a standard D sharp minor triad. Take a seventh and invert it so that goes at the bottom. So that's D sharp minor 7, and then add that, and that makes it adding a 9 as well, which is a nice little chord. I'm going to turn the wet up here and turn the filter off so you get that sound, just so you understand what each of those little bits did. That is still quite harsh sounding, so I'm going to take a filter and take some of the top end off, and then to create some movement in the pad, have a bit of LFO on the filter so the frequency goes up and down. I change the phase here so that it doesn't go from ear to ear. So now we've got a basic chord with a bit of character and a bit of movement, which is quite nice. The next thing to always think about, and this is really crucial with pads, is where you want them to sit in the mix. And that doesn't just mean volume, that means stereo picture as well. So I'm sticking a chorus on it. This is a really useful way to separate sounds out, make them sound a bit wider and just generally more interesting, as well as fitting in the stereo image better. So my understanding is that they work by detuning the signal slightly. So if you listen to the right ear, you'll hear, as I increase the rate here, the detuning gets faster, and if I change it in this axis, the amount by which the frequency is changed is greater. So I want quite a subtle change here, and give it a bit of feedback. Not a huge amount. So that just gives it a bit of richness and movement. And also it sounds a bit wider out in the stereo field. Excuse me. Okay, so that's the dry signal. That's wet. I'm just going to bleed this in. It's still got the same kind of intensity from the middle signal, but a bit more width to it. That's quite nice. Next thing to do will be stick a reverb on it. I don't want any of this filtering or spin or any of that rubbish. Turning that up, so that basically just means that the type of reverb sound that I'm looking for, the diffuse bit as opposed to the reflections off the walls, is louder. Make it sound bigger, and then increase the decay time here. So what happens is, because it takes longer to decay, you have more of it hanging around, and it layers up nicely and really pads out the sound and makes it thicker. So that's the fully wet sound. That's dry. And there, I think, is a nice intermediary between the two, where you've got a bit of width, but it's still not it's not completely lost in the background. Now, because I effectively took off the top of the frequencies with this low pass earlier. I'm going to Control A, Control G. That creates a group, and then I duplicate this chain, and I'm going to call this one tops. And if we just listen to this one now, I'm going to put some, this is a trick I quite often use, bit crushing. I got this one from Benny Froobs, actually, out to you if you're watching. So bit crushing on there. Gets you that hissy distortion, gives the sound a nice bit of character. And then what I'll do is stick a filter here so that only the top end comes through. Just a little bit of movement from the chord as well. And just to mess with it a bit more, because that's what we like to do. Flanger. Ooh. Subtle bit of flanger there. Just to create movement in the top end of the sound. So now, turn that down and then just add that in on top of the original dry signal. And turn that flanger down a bit. There you go, you've got a fairly full sounding pad there with a bit of movement going on to keep things interesting. If you really want to make sure it's out at the periphery of the mix, you can use a utility there for some Hass effect. That's quite nice. Hass effect works by delaying the signal between the two ears, so one ear plays slightly before the other, and your brain interprets that as the sound coming from further away for complex reasons that I'm not going to go into in this. But there you go, there's one fairly basic but quite nice sounding pad. Let's move on and do another one. Don't mind what I'm doing here, this is just, I have to set up in funny ways so that I can get all of the recording to work. Oh, I know what I wanted to do. Okay, so this, I'm going to build a pad out of an 808 cowbell. Everyone loves a cowbell. So, when I find it, there we go. That's a fun little sound. So, I'm going to, I think, I'll stick a reverb on that and freeze it. Take so that'll just keep going forever now, which is quite fun. What I might even do is duplicate it. Still, that's a fun starting point. I'm just going to use that effectively as a volume control so that you can hear me. Now, things to do with that sound. If in doubt, saturate. I quite want to just bring out that airy sound at the top. That's quite nice. There we go, and by turning the saturator up, you get that distortion. It's quite interesting. And then you make it thicker by having maybe some delay. So let's just have a simple one. Actually, yeah. So this is a fun thing that you can do with delays. You can hear how that's modulating the sound and creating some kind of fluctuations in the pitch and the amplitude just by how the waves interact when you increase and decrease the decay time. So I'll settle on that, I think. Another thing that's really fun to play with on pads is this grain delay, because it allows you to do some weird stuff like shifting the pitch. So what I quite often do sometimes with this is shift it up an octave like that. And I got this idea from I've got a pedal for an effects pedal for my guitar, a Digitech Whammy, that basically acts as a pitch shifter, but the algorithm for working out what the notes incoming are isn't very good, and when you feed it more than one note it glitches and does weird stuff. So I tried to replicate that in this effects rack, this one specifically, and managed to get quite close to that sound. So let's just turn this up again. Just gonna and then maybe we can add in some of the other sounds as well. This is a kind of spring reverb type sound I put together. It's quite nice. And then so you can hear the kind of movement in that reverb and the kind of weird distortion that sounds a bit like a spring reverb to my ear. And there's one with loads of chorus, and this is a bit crushed one, low pass to take all the sound off the top. Those together, so this is just giving you an idea. There's an endless number of things that you can do running effects that just distort the sound and do interesting stuff with it. You can feed it into one of my return tracks here, like this distortion track. So quite nice. Maybe the verb, this one, which is a kind of stereo tool, so completely takes out the mids, and you can just turn up the width there, so it just gets wider out to the sides. So yeah, there's another relatively simple pad just by freezing an 808 cowbell and sticking some stuff on it. I don't want to go on. I think that's a good introduction to a couple of good sound sources and ways to process things. Gives you an idea of how to get things in the stereo field and make things sound a bit more interesting. And that's essentially all there is to do it with pads. And I think I'll conclude the first GEMP admin tutorial there. Thanks for listening and look forward to the next one.